So this week I was at the gym one afternoon. And see, before I went to the gym, you know how you have the little card, the pass that they scan to get you into the rec center? I couldn't find my pass anywhere. And so I went and I talked to the lady at the front desk and I said, look, I guess I need a new pass because I can't find my pass anywhere. And she said, Ryan, no big deal. We're going to go ahead and print you out another one. No cost this time, but you need to pray for us. Yeah. And so her coworker looked at her, and she looked at her coworker. She said, oh, don't worry, he's a pastor. He can pray for us. And I kind of laughed, and I said, has it been a rough day? And she said, no, just pray for us. All right. And although I appreciate the sentiment, I couldn't help but wonder, how do we get here? Like pastors are way up here when it comes to connection with God, but all you other people, sorry, you're just kind of down here. And I was talking to a buddy just last week as well, and he was telling me that for the past 2 years, he hasn't really been able to pray. And he's a church guy, active in the church. He's going through some difficult family circumstances, and he said, this is really messy, and I just don't know how to invite God into this mess. And when I start to pray, I just have this feeling of being unworthy or not enough, and so I just haven't really prayed. Some of you all can resonate with that, right? Been there, done that. I have. And at the same time, I wonder, how did we get here? And it's like the more people I talk to, the more people I encounter who have this fear about connecting with God because they're not going to do it right. How do we get here? And is it possible that we humans, or we church people, the church, the big C, capital C church, is it possible that we have made prayer and connection with God just so complex and overwhelming that people are checking out? And so here's the deal. If you have zero questions about prayer, if you are completely convinced on the role of prayer and the function of prayer in your life, if your prayer life is just kind of nailed, well, I invite you to check out for the next few minutes. Go ahead and tap the person next to you. Let them know you're going to need their shoulder because you're going to take a little nap. Daydream about how many tacos you're going to have this afternoon. But here's the thing. If you have some serious questions and doubts and struggles with the very notion of prayer, if you have ever thought to yourself, man, it just seems like this whole connection with God thing should just be a little bit more simple, then stick around, tune in, because you're in good company, and we're going to go somewhere. So before we go somewhere, let me start with 2 things about prayer. For those of you who like to define the terms, and I'm sure you can jump on Google and find all sorts of definitions for prayer, I'm defining prayer this way because it works for me today. Those moments when you realize that you are already connected to God, that you already are connected to the divine energy that is always flowing in our midst, then you tap into those moments. God is already here. God is not up there somewhere. God is right here with us. That divine energy is here, and we tap into that. Are you aware of it? Are you tapping into it? Second thing about prayer. Prayer changes us. Have you ever encountered that person who is just so gung-ho about going out into the world and changing the world, but the problem is whenever they open their mouth, they are a big fiery ball of anger, and you can only hear their anger? You know what I mean? I was on a social media thread this week following a conversation, and it was on a social issue, and this person was getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and finally some other person says to this person, says, look, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but all we can hear is your anger. And then this person, without missing a beat, pipes up and says, well, yeah, but Jesus had a righteous anger. Okay, dude, you just keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, no one's listening. See, the truth is we can do a pretty good job at getting the energy to go out into the world and change the world. Meanwhile, there are often times at the same time where our inner lives are just all sorts of out of whack. Prayer addresses our inner lives. Jesus shows us how to be the change that we want to be in the world, that we want to see in the world. So bear these 2 things in mind as we look at some of Jesus' words about prayer and as we look this morning at one of his prayers from the Sermon on the Mount. The first thing, the simplicity of connection. God is already in our midst. And the second thing, keeping your inner life in check. Being healthy in here so that when you go out there, you can actually create change. Are you with me? So let's talk for a moment about the simplicity of prayer. Here's how Jesus talks about it in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6. We're going to be in verses 5 through 13, and we're going to pause in between, and we're going to make some sense of this. By the way, this is Jesus at his best. Check it out. When you pray, don't be like hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on street corners so that people will see them. I assure you, that's not the only reward they'll get. But when you pray, go to your room. Shut the door and pray to your God who is present in that secret place. Your God who sees what you do in secret will reward you. When you pray, don't pour out a flood of empty words as the Gentiles do. They think that by saying many words they'll be heard. Don't be like them. How's that for Jesus? Don't be like them. Now, here's what was going on in Jesus' day. Some of the religious leaders would love to go into the synagogues and the street corners, and they would love to make prayer about some sort of public performance rather than the simple connecting with God, communicating with God. Now, in the first century Greco-Roman world, the world of Jesus, there was also Gentiles, and they would too. They would love to go out in the streets and offer these lengthy, lofty prayers because for them, it was about getting the gods and the deities on their side. So the more words they could use, the more they would get the ears of the gods. The prettier, the fancier their words, the more serious they would appear, and so gods would begin blessing them. And Jesus says, you don't have to do that. Our God is not like those gods. You don't have to do that anymore. Something new is happening. Have you ever heard someone pray publicly? And you're like, dang. I mean, their words, they're just kind of so flowy. And they use these big theological, religious words, and you're like, oh, man, I don't know what they mean, but they sound pretty. And only if I could connect with God like that, then I'd be somebody. Really? I mean, I don't know about y'all, but honestly, you know what my prayers end up sounding like more often than not? Here, God, you take it. You take it, it's just too heavy. I'm not very good at carrying all this. You take it, God. It's kind of like Anne Lamott's book, Help, Thanks, Wow, the 3 Essential Prayers. Anyone read it? She tells a story about a nun, and this nun was praying every day, God, take away from me my character defects. God, take away from me my character defects. Prayed it for years, and years go by, and finally God gets back to her and says, look, I'm not taking anything away from you. You have to give it to me. Here, you take it. So the next few lines in this passage are what we know as the Lord's Prayer. Jesus is teaching us how to pray. Jesus is teaching me how to pray that simple prayer here. Here's how he begins. Verse 9. Pray like this. Our Father who is in heaven, uphold the holiness of your name. Or you've heard it said, how we prayed on Sunday mornings, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Jesus begins by saying a new thing is happening. Our God is not like the other gods. Pay attention. I mean, you can imagine Jesus standing on this Galilean hillside, overlooking the Sea of Galilee with a crowd of people and saying, pay attention. Our God is not like the other gods. Verse 10, bring your kingdom so that your will is done on earth as it's done in heaven. Or thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it's done in heaven. Now keep in mind, Jesus is a first century Jewish rabbi. And in the rabbinic tradition, they believed that God created the world in such a way that all life could and should thrive. If all life wasn't thriving, they believed that God's will wasn't being done on earth. Does it make sense? Think about how this would play out in our world. If all life isn't thriving, is it safe to say if 3.1 million children died of hunger last year, is it safe to say God's will is not being done on earth? Just a little example. Is it safe to assume that heaven is doing just fine? It's earth that needs the help. We humans are the ones who need the help, the healing, and the wholeness. Verse 11. Give us the bread we need for today. Give us this day our daily bread. You see, in the recovery movement, we have a very simple saying, one day at a time. One day at a time, and it's very simple because the truth is, if I start getting all wound up about tomorrow, if I start getting all wound up about what the future holds for Ryan, then I start living like this, and the future's mine, and you're not going to take it from me. Oh, I'm going to control things, and I'm going to manipulate things. And when Ryan behaves that way, Ryan can begin to make a big mess of things. Here. God, you take it. The future's too heavy. You take it. Here. Verse 12. Forgive us for the ways we have wronged you, just as we also forgive those who have wronged us. Or forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That's a hard one, isn't it? I mean, it's not complex. It's pretty simple. It's just hard to live out. Forgiveness. Man, this is, if I can be honest with you all, this is one I'm in battle with right now. This is not an old, distant battle. This is one I'm currently battling right now. You know, my stepdad, who was came into my life. He was a father figure for me from the age of 6. Had a 30-year marriage with my mom. We were tight. We were tight up until 1 month ago. 1 month ago, he said he was out of there. Just walked away. And I don't say it out of anger or resentment. I just don't know if I'm ever going to see the guy again. I say it because he's pretty gone. I haven't heard from him. Forgiveness. Man, I don't want to talk about forgiveness. I'd rather talk about revenge. I'd rather talk about how can we get him to give me the phone, let me text him. Well, I'm good with my words. I had a big brother, older, bigger than me. I learned how to fight with my words. I'll text him. I want him to hurt the way we've hurt. I want his heart to break the way he broke my mom's heart. I mean, forgiveness. You know, just last week, a couple of days ago, my wife, Tammy, she was asked to resign from her job effective immediately. Or effective immediately, because we're really serious here. She was asked by the organization, the Christian organization that she works for. They said, we need to know your position on gay rights and gay marriage. And she said, well, I don't think it's a sin. I don't think God is opposed to this. You're out of here then. I mean, forgiveness. Now, I don't want to talk about forgiveness this week. I want to talk about revenge. You hurt someone I love. I want to talk about how to get you back, how to make you feel what we felt. But see, the problem is, every time I go down the road of revenge, I start to give up things. I can give up things like my peace and my serenity. And see, if I do that, then I'm in real danger of giving up my sobriety, and that is way too important. I cannot afford to give up my sobriety. And see, every time I get in a conversation up here about what is forgiveness, I have to imagine Jesus is taking me by the shoulders and shaking me, saying, Ryan, it is not about them. It is not about him. This is about you, and this is about you letting go so that you can be free. Because forgiveness is about freedom. It has nothing to do with the other person. Here. God, you take it because I just kind of suck at it. You just take it. Back to the simplicity of connection, because sometimes we make it too difficult, don't we? And it's not always easy, but it is simple. It's the simplicity of connecting with God and realizing that God is already present right here in our midst. We don't have to work for it. You know, for Christmas, I bought my wife, Tammy, I bought her 2 concert tickets to Justin Furstenfeld. He's the lead singer of Blue October. The show was just a couple weeks ago, so this Christmas gift we had to wait on a little bit. But I knew nothing about Justin Furstenfeld and Blue October, but she was a big fan of them. And so we went just a couple of weeks ago, and he called this the Open Book Tour. It was just him with his acoustic guitar and the Soiled Dove Underground. You ever been there? It's our favorite concert venue. Beautiful place, quaint, small. And it was called the Open Book Tour. So what he did was he would tell a story, then play a song, and tell a story, then play a song. And you know those moments where you're sitting there and you think, oh my goodness. It took me a while to catch on what was happening, but this is profound. This was like one of the most profound evenings I had been part of in a long time. And he was telling his story about 2/3 of the way through, mixed in with a bunch of F-bombs. He started telling his story of how he found connection with God. It was like that moment where you think, oh my goodness, is everyone else hearing this? Because this is profound. Things got so silent when he started talking about God, you could hear a pin drop in the room. Of a rowdy bunch of concert goers, you could hear a pin drop. And here's the story he told. He said, I was 73 days into rehab because I had given my life away to drugs and alcohol. I was 73 days into rehab, and I got up early that morning, 5 o'clock in the morning before everyone else, and I went outside on the porch, and I had my cigarette and a cup of black coffee because they weren't going to take these two things from me. And I was on that porch, and I was doing business. You, me, we're going to do some business right now, right here, you and me. Because what I'm sick of is listening to everyone else around me tell me how they found their higher power and how you've come into their lives. And God, if you're real, how come you don't come into my life the way you have come into their lives? And God, if you're real, then make that squirrel jump from that tree to that tree. Nothing. And God, if you're real, then just like in the Bible, make that bush catch on fire. Nothing. And this bee is flying and buzzing around his head. Bzzz. He's smacking it away. Bzzz. I'm trying to do business here, and this bee just keeps getting in the way and landing on my head. And he looks in the corner of the porch, and this bee is bzzz, flying towards the corner. Bzzz. And in the corner of the porch, there's a can, and this can literally says bee killer. Bzzz. Bzzz. Finally, the bee lands on this can. Bzzz. And the bee's trying to get inside this can. And he stops and he starts having this conversation with the bee. You stupid bee, what are you doing? You've seen all your homies go in there and they don't come out, they die in there. I mean, for like 30 seconds, you could hear a pin drop. And he said, God, if that's who you are, if it's that simple, then I get it. I am free. 2 weeks later, he gets out of rehab. And he goes to the hospital to meet his wife who's going into labor with their baby girl. And she gives birth to this beautiful baby girl. And after she has this girl, she looks at her husband and says, Justin, she will never have to see the old you. And he wrote this song called Fear. And he wrote it for his daughter.